Before the bullets fly, the budget bleeds. War breaks money first, through debt, printing, and the quiet tax of inflation. Welcome to Money Lore. Today we'll follow the money behind modern wars, from revolutionary France and Napoleon to Britain's bond machine, the American Civil War, the World Wars, and the Cold War, and we'll translate the finance into plain English. Who paid, how the bill was hidden, and why the lesson still matters. War needs cash before it needs courage. Guns, food, fuel, ships, pay, everything has to move now while tax revenue climbs slowly. So states reach for three levers: borrow, tax, and print. Taxes are visible and unpopular. Borrowing buys time. Printing looks like magic until prices move. Together, borrowing and printing shove today's cost into the future by eroding the currency that settles the debt. Start in France in the 1790s. The revolutionaries seized church land and issued assignats, paper money backed by that land. On paper, it sounded safe. There was collateral. In practice, expenses outran income. The government paid soldiers, bought grain, and tried to stabilize cities. To close the gap, it printed more. Each new issue weakened the last. Sellers raised prices. Many refused paper and asked for silver or goods instead. Inflation rose, trust fell, and the state discovered a hard rule. You cannot feed an army with money the public will not accept. Napoleon took power and changed tactics. He centralized tax collection, demanded contributions from conquered territories, and created the Bank of France to steady the currency. The model was simple: collect better at home, extract abroad, and use victory to fund the next campaign. It worked until it didn't. When victory slowed, the cash stopped and the debt remained. Waterloo was not only a military defeat, it exposed a financing model that depended on permanent success. Plunder pays until it ends. Across the Channel, Britain turned war into finance. The Treasury and the Bank of England sold war bonds, including consols, perpetual bonds that paid interest without a fixed maturity. Parliament added a temporary income tax. Temporary measures tend to outlast the emergency. But Britain had something that mattered more than clever instruments: credibility. Investors trusted the state, courts, and City of London. That trust kept borrowing costs low and fleets at sea. The real price showed up later in interest payments and mild inflation, but a deep bond market let Britain spread the cost across years and across the population. Now the American Civil War, two experiments at the same time. The Union issued greenbacks, paper not backed by gold, and sold bonds directly to citizens. Inflation rose, but the Union had the thing markets really buy: a future. People believed the Union would exist after the war, so the paper held. The Confederacy issued graybacks and promised cotton would back them. The Union naval blockade broke the cotton pledge. Printing accelerated, prices exploded, and pay lost value between paycheck and purchase. By 1865, Confederate currency wasn't weak. It was worthless. The outcome was financial before it was final. Markets fund the side they believe will be alive tomorrow. World War I made war finance global. Major powers suspended the gold standard: promises first, metal later. Britain issued war loans. The United States sold Liberty bonds. Germany relied on short-term bills and war loans that assumed victory would repay them. Victory didn't. Inflation did. After the armistice, the bills came due into shattered economies. Germany's financial war matured into Weimar hyperinflation. That was not a surprise. It was a delayed receipt. World War II refined the toolkit. Governments combined rationing, war bonds, and financial repression, administratively keeping interest rates below inflation, so the real value of wartime debt shrank quietly. Households saved because there was little to buy. Later, controlled inflation reduced the burden of that debt. It felt like patriotism. It worked like a stealth tax. Treasuries and central banks moved together. Stable bond yields, targeted credit, full employment for the arsenal of democracy. The method worked militarily and fiscally, but it trained states to love a habit: borrow now, let inflation do cleanup later. Peace did not dismantle the machine. It changed the label. Enter the Cold War: long mobilization without formal declarations, permanent budgets for defense, research, and alliances. The United States added a structural advantage, the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Trade and savings flowed into dollar assets. Foreign surpluses bought U.S. Treasury bonds. Those bonds financed U.S. power at home and abroad. It was elegant, and it worked, until Vietnam and rising deficits drained U.S. gold. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. From that day, major currencies were pure fiat, backed by confidence, not metal. War, welfare, and everything else could now be financed entirely with promises. The discipline had to come from institutions and culture rather than from a gold peg. Once money is only faith, the temptations multiply. If voters resist higher taxes, governments sell more bonds. If bond yields rise, central banks buy bonds with newly created money. If that risk inflation, officials rename it stabilization, stimulus, quantitative easing. The mechanics are the same. Shift the bill to bondholders and savers through time and prices. Who pays? Not just the enemy, the bondholder who earns 3% while prices rise 6%, the worker whose wage arrives after the price change, the retiree whose safe account loses purchasing power. Inflation is the tax you did not vote on. Debt is the draft without a lottery. Together, they turn citizens into involuntary financiers of national policy. The pattern does not depend on ideology. Napoleon called it contributions. Britain called it consols. Lincoln called it greenbacks. 20th century democracies called it victory bonds and price stability. The names change, the math stays. War accelerates spending. Debt rises. Printing follows. If discipline fails, trust erodes. When trust erodes, money demands a higher yield to stick around, or it leaves. There are ways to do this less badly. Credible states publish budgets that match reality. They sell bonds at transparent terms. They limit central bank financing to true emergencies and end those programs when the emergency ends. They allow prices to move and taxes to reflect choices. They tell citizens the truth. Wars are expensive, and somebody pays. And there are signals that things are going wrong. Short-term debt rolls that keep growing. Interest costs that begin to crowd out basic services. Laws that force captive buyers, banks, pensions, insurers, to hold more government debt than they would by choice. Central banks that talk price stability while targeting bond yields. Slogans that promise temporary measures without exit plans. Each one is a quiet admission. The financing needs help, and the help is coming from your future. The Cold War added one more lesson. If your currency is trusted, you can rent the world's savings. But rent must be paid in growth, in competence, in the reputation of fair courts and stable rules. Lose those, and the world diversifies away. The privilege runs on credibility, and credibility is a balance sheet you cannot print. So what actually survives the financing of war? Not the posters, not the promises, not the temporary taxes. What survives is capacity. Factories that can switch back to peacetime goods. Energy that powers real production. Logistics that move food and medicine. What survives is reputation. Institutions that kept their word under pressure. What survives is hard or external value. Commodities, foreign currency, land, assets a government cannot create at a press conference. And what always survives is skill, the ability to produce something needed at any price level. Here are the takeaways, stated plainly. First, debt can win a war, only discipline can win the peace. Borrowing is a tool. If you never stop, it becomes the system, and the system begins to serve the debt. Second, inflation is not free. It looks like policy success in the short run, and reads like lower real wages and weaker savings in the long run. Markets remember. Third, credibility is capital. Investors fund states they believe will exist and honor contracts after the emergency. That is why Britain could finance long wars and the Confederacy could not. Fourth, transparency beats slogans. A plan that names the buyers of the bonds, the exit from controls, and the role of the central bank is worth more than any speech. Fifth, protect yourself like a participant, not a spectator. Keep part of your savings outside local political promises, diversified currency, productive assets, real skills. Own something that sells to human needs even when prices move. If you strip away uniforms and speeches, the financing map is simple. Revolutionary France tried land-backed paper and printed past trust. Napoleon taxed and plundered until defeats exposed the gap. Britain rented credibility through bonds and taxes and spread the cost over time. The Union paired paper with a future people believed in. The Confederacy paired paper with collateral it couldn't ship. The World Wars used rationing, bonds, and repression to bridge the gap, then let inflation do the cleanup. The Cold War ran on reserve currency privilege, backed by industry and law, until deficits demanded a new anchor: confidence alone. The language changes, the ledger does not. Before the bullets fly, the budget bleeds. And when the budget bleeds, money is asked to carry more than numbers. It is asked to carry the story. The story always sounds the same: temporary, manageable, necessary. Sometimes it is. Often it isn't. If this gave you a clearer way to see the cost behind the headlines, subscribe. History has the answers, and Money Lore will keep translating them into plain English you can use.